Let me take you back to a street in Birmingham, where the sun hit just right and everything seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. A black man, clean-cut and calm, pulled over for nothing more than existing. A white officer, armed with more than just a badge, made a choice she'd made before. But this time, something changed. A camera was rolling, a question was asked, and a community, tired of being quiet, started listening. This isn't a story about shouting. It's about standing, about how one man's silence held more power than any siren. You think you've seen justice before? Not like this. Julian Carter drove slowly down Pine Street, a familiar stretch of cracked asphalt, lined with swaying oaks and faded storefronts. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the windshield, catching dust motes in midair. His shirt was neatly pressed, his eyes steady on the road, and in the passenger seat sat a brown grocery bag, holding milk, bread, and a box of lemon cookies. His mother's favorite. He hadn't been home in nearly a year, but this street hadn't changed. It still smelled like summers past and Sunday dinners. Then came the flash of red and blue. He exhaled slowly, glanced into the rearview mirror, and saw the patrol car pull closer. No siren, just the lights, just enough to say, "You're next." Julian pulled over, careful and deliberate, his hands resting on the wheel. The cruiser door opened. Officer Madeline Rourke stepped out. Mid-40s, posture stiff, mirrored sunglasses hiding any trace of warmth. One hand hovered near her hip. "License and registration," she said flatly. No greeting, no explanation. Julian nodded, calm, sure, reaching into my glove box. He moved slowly, handed over the documents. Rourke stared at the license, her brow furrowed. "Carter," she repeated, voice sharper, "step out of the vehicle." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You match the description of a suspect in a nearby incident," she stated, already opening his door. "I haven't done anything. Can you tell me?" "Out. Now." Julian stepped out. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked a question, but that was enough. Rourke spun him around, shoved him onto the hood, and cuffed his wrists in full view of a stunned sidewalk. Across the street, a teenager froze mid-step, phone raised. The screen blinked red. He filmed every second. The video hit TikTok hours later. The caption read, "He didn't fight, she did." The hashtag trended by morning. Justice for Julian. That night, inside a quiet kitchen lit only by the flicker of the local news, Laverne Carter sat in her robe, hands trembling around a chipped mug. Her son's face appeared on screen, calm, confused, handcuffed. She didn't say a word, but her tears did. The night dragged on in silence, broken only by the low buzz of a flickering fluorescent light. Julian sat alone on a cold wooden bench, his wrists still marked red from the cuffs, his back against the cinder block wall. No one explained anything. No one offered water. No one mentioned a phone call. Just the occasional shuffle of boots past the holding cell and a clipboard tossed carelessly onto a desk. Morning arrived with no sunrise, just a sharp knock and a tired-looking officer holding a sheet of paper. "You're being charged with obstruction and resisting arrest," he muttered without eye contact. Julian stared at him, then gave a short, incredulous laugh. "I never resisted anything. I asked why." But the officer had already turned and walked away. When he was finally granted one phone call, Julian didn't hesitate. He dialed the number by memory even though it had been years. On the third ring, a voice answered. "Whitman," came the smooth baritone. "It's me, Julian." The pause was short but weighted. "I'll be there," Andre said. "Don't say another word." Back in Atlanta, Andre Whitman had already kicked off his loafers for the night, but now he was lacing up shoes with courtroom soles. By the time Julian was processed out on bail, Andre was waiting in a charcoal suit and quiet fury. Within hours he was scanning police records, and one name kept surfacing. Officer Madeline Rourke. 2 previous complaints. 2 black male defendants. Same vague charge. Resisting arrest. Both cases dismissed. Both filed under procedural errors. The symmetry wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. In a quiet office tucked behind the Jefferson County Courthouse, Renee Holloway squinted at her computer screen. She had seen that name before. Julian Carter. Something about it stirred old memories. Files she'd helped process, reports she'd been told to file and forget, but now she couldn't. Not again. She opened the archive database, typed in Madeline Rourke, and clicked through the buried history. One by one, she marked them: names, dates, stories, and this time she didn't look away. The cafe was nearly empty, save for the hum of a fridge and the occasional clink of ceramic cups. Late sunlight filtered through the front window, casting long golden stripes across the table where Renee Holloway sat. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a manila folder across to Andre Whitman. "This is everything," she whispered, voice tight. "Copies, edits, emails, they told us to bury. I've seen too much for too long, and I stayed quiet." Andre didn't speak immediately. He opened the folder and flipped through pages. Handwritten complaints, reports with redacted lines, names that matched the pattern he was starting to see. His expression hardened. "You're sure about this?" he asked, eyes locking with hers. Renee nodded. "I was scared, but silence is a choice, and I chose wrong." Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting Birmingham in a soft amber. Renee drove home in silence, her thoughts distant. As she sat at a red light, her eyes caught the reflection of her younger self in the side mirror. 17, stunned, watching her brother, Jerome, being slammed against a police cruiser outside his high school. She blinked hard. The radio crackled with a news update about Julian Carter's arrest. The names overlapped in her mind, the stories too similar. History, she realized, was not just repeating, it had never stopped. Back at Andre's office, papers sprawled across the conference table. Julian leaned forward, pen in hand, highlighting names of men targeted by Officer Rourke. They were building more than a case, they were building a reckoning. Andre drafted a civil complaint and filed a motion for the dashcam footage. "We're not alone anymore," Julian said quietly, resolve cutting through fatigue. Across town, conversations flared. At Jimmy's barbershop, old men argued, some defending the badge, others defending the truth. In local churches, silence hung heavy. At dinner tables, teens questioned their parents. Would it have been different if he wasn't black? The headlines split the community. One outlet painted Julian as a disruptor. Another called him the conscience Birmingham's been ignoring. The town was divided, but for the first time in years, it was finally paying attention. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood like a stone sentinel against the gray morning sky. Outside, the crowd swelled. Citizens in heavy coats, local reporters jockeying for space, camera crews adjusting angles with quiet urgency. Inside, the tension was even thicker. Julian Carter stepped through the main doors, dressed in a sharp gray suit. His stride was calm, shoulders squared, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. Resolve laced with pain, dignity sharpened by months of waiting. Behind him, Andre walked with measured confidence, briefcase in hand, each step echoing on the marble floor. Across the aisle, Officer Madeline Rourke sat ramrod straight in full uniform. Her face betrayed nothing. Tight bun, eyes forward, mouth locked in a line of steel. But beneath the surface, her chest tightened with every breath. The courthouse wasn't just a building today. It was a crucible. The lights dimmed, a screen descended, the courtroom fell still. Dashcam footage played, Julian behind the wheel, hands visible, voice calm. Madeline's commands sharp, accusatory, her hand on her holster, her shove, the cold clack of handcuffs. The audience didn't move, until the sound of that final click. Somewhere in the gallery, a stifled sob broke through. Laverne Carter lowered her head, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Then came the witnesses. Wallace Green stood first. His voice trembled, but his words did not. "I stayed quiet for too long," he said. Two more followed. Different men, same story. Pulled over, questioned, humiliated. The pattern now undeniable. Faces in the courtroom shifted, some in disbelief, others in shame. But no one looked away. Judge Loretta Milburn leaned forward, her gavel poised. "There is sufficient evidence to move forward with a formal trial," she declared. Officer Madeline Rourke is to be charged with misconduct in public office and falsifying a police report. The gavel struck. Madeline gripped the armrest tightly, jaw clenched. She didn't speak. Julian didn't smile. He simply nodded. Once. Slowly. Renee covered her mouth, tears falling freely. Andre exhaled as he closed the file on the desk. They had cracked open the first door, and beyond it, the truth waited. The courtroom was packed but silent. Even the creak of the wooden benches seemed too loud. Tension sat in the air like humidity before a storm, clinging to skin, wrapping around throats. Madeline Rourke entered quietly through the side door, not in uniform, not with a badge, but in a plain blazer and slacks. Her hair was down for the first time, her face paler than anyone had seen. No courtroom swagger, no clipped authority in her steps. She looked smaller somehow, just a middle-aged woman who'd run out of shields. As she sat, eyes from the gallery followed her, not with anger, but with a deeper, quieter judgment, the kind that hurts more because it doesn't yell. Julian Carter sat still, hands folded on the defense table. No smugness, no visible vindication, just composure. The same calm that carried him through every silent night, every whispered headline, every email from strangers. When his eyes met Renee's across the room, her nod was barely perceptible, but it held more weight than applause. Wallace sat next to her, stone still. Behind them, Laverne Carter, Julian's mother, clutched her purse in her lap, her knuckles white, her eyes glistening but proud. Judge Loretta Milburn adjusted her glasses and began reading the verdict. Her voice was even, but final. Madeline Rourke, you are found guilty of abuse of power, falsification of official reports, and professional misconduct. You are hereby stripped of all authority and permanently barred from service in any law enforcement capacity. Madeline didn't cry, but her shoulders sagged, her lips trembled. She had no handcuffs on, but the loss of identity weighed heavier than chains. Renee let the tears fall, not from pain, but from release, from knowing that silence had finally broken. Wallace stood, walked to Julian, and laid a hand on his shoulder. One small gesture that echoed years of unspoken frustration and unacknowledged pain. No one clapped, no one cheered, but as each person in that courtroom slowly rose to their feet, the room filled with something louder than sound. Respect, closure, and something like justice. The headlines came swiftly, but not with the frenzy of scandal. They landed like steady raindrops on a parched field. The New York Times read, "He didn't shout, he stood." CNN aired a full segment, "Justice in Silence, Julian Carter and a Quiet Shift in Police Reform." The stories weren't about outrage, they were about resolve. They weren't loud, but they echoed. In Birmingham, the story reached more than newsstands. Local high schools folded the case into their civics curriculum. One teacher, standing before a class of restless teenagers, held up the newspaper and said, "This isn't just law. This is ethics. And it starts with knowing when silence is strength." Julian declined major speaking events. When civil rights groups invited him to keynote panels, he responded politely, "Let me talk to the kids instead." He didn't want a stage. He wanted a circle. A space where eye contact could replace microphones, where listening mattered more than applause. At the community center on Tuesday nights, plastic chairs lined up beneath fluorescent lights. A dry erase board read in neat handwriting, "Know your rights." Julian stood by it, marker in hand, not to teach, but to guide. Teenagers in hoodies, single mothers with notebooks, seniors with quiet eyes, and in the back, a young officer in uniform sitting still, not taking notes, but absorbing every word. Julian didn't pace. He didn't preach. He asked questions. Do you know what to say during a traffic stop? Do you know when to remain silent? And the room, usually filled with life's noise, grew still. They weren't here for drama. They were here for change. At the end of class, Julian picked up the marker one more time. He walked slowly to the board and wrote, "We don't stay silent anymore." The sun outside had started to set. Its light slipped through the window, casting a soft gold across the whiteboard, illuminating every letter like a quiet promise. The camera pulled back through the glass, out to the street where Birmingham's evening pulsed with routine. But something in the air had shifted. Justice doesn't need to shout. It needs someone to ask, why? Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the deepest truths. This story wasn't about noise, it was about presence. About the strength it takes to ask one hard question in the face of unchecked power. Why? And the courage to keep asking, even when the world tells you not to. Because justice isn't a moment. It's a movement. It's built not on rage alone, but on resilience. On truth spoken softly, and actions that echo louder than any shout. It reminds us that change doesn't always come with a roar. Sometimes, it walks in quietly, stands tall, and doesn't flinch. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep, something you've seen, felt, or feared, we invite you to be part of the conversation. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge silence and speak truth. Because together, we don't just watch. We remember, we reflect, and most of all, we rise.